Okay, hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Darren Q, and I'm the Dean here at the Kroc School of Peace Studies. Welcome, all of you, to our annual conversation with the Women PeaceMakers event. Thank you so much for joining us and for taking time. Our field has long argued about the urgent importance of engaging women in peace initiatives. The UN estimates that roughly that if you increase women participation in peace processes, the durability of peace agreements that are reached in those processes increases by 35%. And yet, women make up less than 10% of peace negotiators around the world. And only 13 to 14% of mediators were women in this same United Nations data set. 6 to 7% of peace signatories historically are women, according to the Council on Foreign Relations. And yet, women, between 612 and 676 million women approximately, are living within close distance of deadly conflict events in recent years. So clearly women's exclusion from the peace world has been a detriment to all the efforts that we do. In research we published here at the Kroc School just last month in a survey of women peacebuilders around the world, 65% reported receiving at least one threat in 2024. When asked if they thought that these threats were related to their identities as women peacebuilders, 65% said yes. So not only is it important to have women engaged, not only are they essential for peace processes, but their engagement in these processes is extremely dangerous and is in need of greater attention, research, and support. This is why, since 2002, the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice here at the Kroc School has hosted the Women PeaceMakers Fellowship program. The fellowship offers a unique opportunity for peace builders who focus on issues of gender, peace, and conflict to engage in a cycle of learning, practice, research, and participation that strengthens peace-building partnerships. The Women PeaceMakers Fellowship facilitates impactful collaborations between peace builders from conflict-affected communities and international partner organizations. The fellows also co-create research intended to shape the peace-building field and highlight good practices for peace-building design and implementation. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Women, Peace, and Security field, which recognizes the disproportionate effect of violence on women and girls and calls for women's full and meaningful participation at all stages of international peace and security decision-making, in line with the statistics I just articulated for you earlier. We are proud to have been leaders in the women, peace, and security space for 23 of those 25 years, supporting the work of powerful peace builders like the ones you will meet tonight. We are especially proud to continue that work in a time when funding and support for gender-related programming is declining around the world. In this anniversary year for the Women, Peace, and Security field, it is important to note that peace builders like the ones we are featuring tonight are redefining the concepts of peace and security, advocating for holistic methods that address the full continuum of violence, not just what happens on the battlefield. This year's Women PeaceMakers theme is Borders, Gender, and Violence Reduction, a topic that is timely and particularly important for our communities here in the San Diego-Tijuana region, known as Cali Baja. This is also a conversation that we center in our work here at Kroc, and I encourage you to check out our cross-border initiatives programs as well. In these challenging and polarized times, we hope that this discussion will provide a glimpse into the work that is happening to build safer communities and build long-term sustainable peace. As a sneak peek also, I just want to let you know that 2027, as I just mentioned, is the 25th anniversary of our Women Peace Builders program, and we are making plans to build on the programming that we have here, so stay tuned. Stay connected. If you're interested in this work, remember we have master's programs in peace and justice, restorative justice, social innovation, conflict management, and humanitarian action. We also have graduate certificates in mediation and social entrepreneurship. So if you're interested in getting engaged, check us out. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panel moderator, Brianna Mauby, and she will introduce to you this year's Women Peacemakers. Brianna is Program Officer for Women, Peace, and Security here at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice. She leads the WPS programming here at the Kroc School, including the Women PeaceMakers program and the Women Waging Peace Network. Brianna worked previously as a research officer with the International Organization for Migration as a Hillary Rodham Clinton Research Fellow at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. She has also worked as a researcher with organizations such as the International Union for Conservation of Nature, UN Women, the Overseas Development Institute, and the World Bank. Brianna received her MA in Conflict Resolution from Georgetown University and a BA in International Affairs from the George Washington University. Please join me in welcoming Brianna and the Women Peacemakers.
Thank you, Dean Q, for the introduction, and thank you all so much for being with us today. It is my true privilege to run the Women Peacemakers program, and I am super excited to introduce you to two amazing peacemakers tonight. We do have a third fellow this year, Noemi Molina, but unfortunately she was not able to be with us tonight. And I want to tell you just a little bit about her before we start our conversation with these two brilliant folks. Noemi is a human rights lawyer working in El Salvador, focused on advancing human rights protections, protecting civic space, and creating sustainable and peaceful solutions to systemic challenges. She can't be with us in person tonight, but please keep an eye on our website or social media. We will be highlighting her work throughout this fellowship year. Now for the conversation with our brilliant leaders on stage. First, I'll introduce you to Estefania Castañeda Perez, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Southern California, USC. Her research investigates how Latinx communities experience the law through policing and surveillance systems, and the consequences of these experiences on their racialization, well-being, and legal consciousness. She has been active in advocating for migrant and transborder communities by providing expert training on the transborder experience at local and national academic and government agencies. She also developed a community action project aimed at empowering transfronteriza women through Rise San Diego's Urban Leadership Fellowship. Welcome, Estefania. Your work focuses here in the San Diego-Tijuana region. Can you tell us what border violence is and how political and community leaders here in San Diego can address border violence?
Thank you very much for the question and all of you for being here today. And in order to address this question, I first have to be very specific about how I think about borders, because this concept of border violence might mean something very different for an asylum seeker or an undocumented migrant. But the way that I'm thinking about it is from the perspective of transborder commuters, which are the population I belong to, and the population that I study as part of my overarching work. Transborder commuters are US citizens and non-citizens that typically reside in Mexican border cities like Tijuana and regularly cross the border into the US for work, education, or other purposes into US border cities like San Diego. And despite the size and magnitude of this population, this community has remained relatively underserved and understudied. Just to give you an idea of the size, at the San Isidro-Tijuana port of entry alone, which is the biggest port in the Western Hemisphere, we're talking about 120,000 people crossing every single day. And if we take into account all of the different ports along the Mexico-US border, it's around 200 million people that cross on a regular basis every single year. And yet, despite the size of this population, we haven't had enough initiatives advocating for this program. So when I think about border violence, I approach it in two different ways, from my own experiential knowledge and also from my own research. I grew up crossing the border ever since I can remember, but I did it more routinely when I began going to middle school in San Diego. This was a couple years after 9/11, and I'm sure some of the audience members remember what it was like, the border before 9/11. You could wait anywhere between 15, at most 30 minutes to cross, which was at the time scandalous. And after 9/11, 3-4 hours on a regular, and that's honestly what most people wait on a regular today during morning peak hours, which entailed, well, some of my earliest memories crossing the border meant waking up as early as 3 a.m., often with very little sleep, and waiting in the backseat of my mother's car, anxious about whether I was going to make it on time to school, potentially get expelled because I was late all the time. I could feel always the anxiety brewing in my stomach. And it wasn't just about the border temporality aspect of it. It was about, what if I say something wrong and the officers send me to secondary inspection? Despite being a US citizen, what if I do something and they take it out on my family who was not US citizen at the time? So you can imagine that for a young person, this is a lot of pressure to carry, about having to perform, about having to think about all the different factors that affect border violence. And from a research standpoint, as part of my doctoral dissertation, I uncovered that border violence encapsulates multiple aspects. Structural violence, which stems from the process of waiting at the border. And it's not that waiting in itself is a violent process, it's that your whole life is structured around waiting in traffic, which is impacted by the fact that ports are often understaffed, and sometimes inspections take a really long time. So there's no structure. Time becomes a commodity in this case. In addition, state violence, ranging from pre-inspection surveillance, direct contact with US Customs and Border Protection officers, which I will refer for the rest of the conversation, CBP for short, and potentially being sent to secondary inspection, which is often where people get sent for additional inspections. And these are often legal gray zones because they're outside of the purview of the public eye. So a lot of rights abuses can occur inside inspection facilities. So all of these different aspects that I mentioned do contribute to take a huge toll on the physical body and on the well-being of transborder commuters. And that's really what I'm hoping to explore more as part of this program. And so what can we do? There's a lot of things that we can do to address all of these different levels of border violence. But I will identify just three main areas. From a public health standpoint, and this is based on the work that I have done at the San Diego County Health and Human Services as a consultant, public health practitioners can work collaboratively with Tijuana-based practitioners to develop more programs addressing border trauma stemming from the border and also from the potential of family separation. It's crucial that there's these public health programs that specifically target these different levels of violence that are experienced on an everyday basis. One challenge, of course, is the lack of funding, because so much of this funding is for San Diego residents. So this is where binational coalitions can be built to lobby at the state level to ensure that there's more funding for binational communities, especially because transborder commuters are not just residents from Tijuana. These are people that are very important for the social and the political fabric of the city. The second part is from the legal standpoint. For anybody that is involved in legal advocacy or just civil rights advocacy, it is important that there are resources for transborder commuters so that if they do experience a rights violations, they know who to turn to. As part of my research, I realized that the majority of people, either they did not know what are their rights, or if they did know which agency they can file a complaint to, which is the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties under the Department of Homeland Security, they were afraid because of fear of retaliation. So we need advocates to actually support them with intakes so they can file complaints through CRCL under the Department of Homeland Security. And what can community members do? Well, you can be part of organizations that already do important work documenting rights abuses. Some examples are the American Friends Service Committee, Alliance San Diego, and Southern Border Communities Coalition. These are three main organizations that I know that are doing very important work documenting rights abuses. And even if you don't have the time to volunteer, you can donate to these organizations and also use education spaces to share knowledge on what it means to endure border violence.
Thank you for highlighting the legal, the police enforcement, the time, the health, educational impacts of crossing the border, and how the border affects all aspects of folks' lives, and in particular for highlighting people here in San Diego doing that amazing work. Now I'll introduce you to our second fellow on stage, Lillian Olivia Herrero. She is a gender and technology lawyer and the founder of Safe Online Women Kenya. She works to combat technology-facilitated gender-based violence through legal advocacy, feminist policy reform, and digital innovation, including overseeing the AI-powered Safe Her app. Olivia challenges the gendered architecture of digital spaces, reframing them as platforms for peacebuilding and safety rather than control and harm. Olivia, welcome. Your work focuses on emerging technologies. How do these technologies impact migration? What is a digital border?
Thank you so much, Brianna. It's very nice to be in the midst of people from San Diego. And I'd just like to begin by defining what emerging technologies are in the context of border. So at the border, when we talk about emerging technologies, this could be biometric identification systems. They could be artificial intelligence profiling systems, or even risk scoring systems. And so what is an algorithm? An algorithm is basically a set of rules that tells a computer how to make decisions. And so what I call digital borders is slightly different from the physical borders, because digital borders are the invisible infrastructure that is in these digital tools that I've mentioned. And so for me, I'll give my own experience. The first time I came to the United States of America, I was traveling from Nairobi, Kenya. And looking at my boarding pass, it had 4 letters, S, 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 and S. And so you'd think, what does this mean? In that moment, I really did not know what that meant. I later on learned that meant secondary security screening selection. And they claimed to have randomly selected me. However, what happened was the randomly selected people happened to be women of color, people of color. And so I remember going through search twice. My bags were thoroughly searched, and I thought to myself, is it because I'm traveling alone? By that time, I had already traveled to 45 countries across 5 continents, and you would think that that would matter. But in that moment, it really didn't matter. And so, was I hiding anything? What was the suspicion? And so I want to explain to us how emerging technologies in, for instance, facial recognition tools are used to impact migration. So when we talk about facial recognition, the biometrics, normally it fails marginalized communities or women of color. And why is this the case? When designing AI, the people who are training these data sets are predominantly white male based in the Silicon Valley, and they do not have the context. So when they're running through these features across multiple images, they might have an idea of how my face looks like, but really it might not be part of the priority to them. So whenever I'm going through a biometric system, and I have experienced this before, where it declines, I have to go through manual inspection. And that really is tiresome, coming from a long flight and wanting to just connect with your loved ones. The other example would be the number of times we find ourselves just clicking accept all in very long consent forms. So now with digital borders, you might have had a long flight, you are at the airport, and because there's a screen in front of you with so many pages to scroll by, you see an accept button that is very green in color, predominant to your eyes, while the decline button is often gray and in small. That is indeed by design. And so in the human-computer interaction, we call that dark patterns. These are deceptive designs meant to trick users or manipulate users into making decisions that they would otherwise not have made. And so at the border context, because you really want to get to your destination, you click accept all, not knowing what you've just done. You have sold your information in a coerced manner, but did you have any choice, really? So what happens is most of these surveillance technologies have partnered with private companies, and these private companies mine our data. And this data mining is through a concept we call data extractivism. The same way minerals are mined, every time you click accept without really knowing what you're consenting to, they have access to your travel history, access to your demographic, access to your social media platforms, and that is what they use to track how you operate for the predictive analysis. And so for me, when I talk about emerging technologies, I mean, this is where the world is already moving. And I see digital borders as a way that is now being exclusionary to marginalized communities. And I want to change that. And I do this in my work by trying to look at the intersection of technology and migration.
Thank you, and thank you for flagging for us the ways that we may not even be aware that our data are being used. Things to watch out for when we click that consent button. Even in the time I've known Olivia, I've gotten more suspicious of consent forms, and really I should read all that fine print. And so if we take away one thing from today, it is read all the consent conditions if you can. But thank you for highlighting the things that are invisible in those systems that we may not know are happening. My next question is for both of you, but I want to remind the audience we'll have Q&A after this question. So you can go to slido.com, and I'll read the code for you. Go to slido.com. The code is 1758120, and you can ask us a question to ask on stage. So this question, and thank you, the code is behind me. This question's for both of you. Estefania, we'll start with you. Why are borders even a peace issue? This is the Women PeaceMakers Fellowship. Why are we talking about borders? How does migration feature into your vision of peace?
Right. Well, ultimately, borders are institutions where state power is the most concentrated. And naturally, especially if we look at land ports of entry, this is an area where there's a climate of absolute acquiescence to state power. There's really very little opportunity to contest rights abuses on spot. So in my work, I've actually identified that resistance often takes shape as strategic acquiescence, occasionally talking to somebody, venting with somebody next to you, but not overt resistance. And when there is overt resistance, unfortunately, it is often a result of punishment. And border violence in itself is a gendered process, right? Because violence doesn't affect all of us in the same way. And as part of my research of uncovering patterns where sometimes US Customs and Border Protection, again, CBP, officers might engage in behavior that is not appropriate. This can include occasional comments about women's appearances. I've uncovered situations of comments about their identity, sexual harassment. And these conversations are very difficult to hear, but it just reveals how gender violence takes shape at the border. And men are often categorized as potential criminals. I want to highlight the case that many of you who are native to San Diego might know of, the case of Anastasio Hernandez Rojas, who was a long-time resident of San Diego, and in 2010, he was deported. When he later tried to come back into San Diego, he was apprehended at the San Isidro Port of Entry, and when he tried to resist, and it wasn't just any type of resistance, he was treated inhumanely. He resisted, and he was met with torture, and ultimately he died as a result of the treatment from CBP officers. But the only reason we know about this case is because citizens recorded this. And although officers were not held accountable, the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights recently published a report this year that found officers liable for Anastasio Hernandez Rojas' death. And they have recommended the US government reopen the case. And why this is important to analyze is that there's this cycle of abuse at the border. Violence sometimes is hard to identify because it can be physical, it can be structural, it can be all sorts of things. And so we need to have proper accountability systems to ensure that these cycles of violence don't occur. But where we have to envision a world of peace, especially at the border. Borders are never going to be peaceful spaces. But what we can advocate for is to ensure that families are not separated. This is not a right or left issue. Families cannot be separated. The trauma that stems from deportation, that young people deserve to feel safe, especially during this political moment. We're observing images that indicate that officers are not following the law and perhaps operating in the ways that they're supposed to operate. But we need to stop these cycles of normalization of violence. And the only way we can do this is that everybody can find ways to build coalitions. Everybody has a role to play. The professor, the student, the activist, the lawyer, all of us have a role to play. And the only way we can counter this rising tide of authoritarianism is by taking a stance.
Thank you, Estefania, for highlighting that we all have a role to play in stemming violence. Olivia, the same question to you. How does migration feature into your vision of peace?
So first, I'd like to say border is a peace issue because this is where the language of security actually meets the reality of exclusion. And I will explain what I mean. So when governments decide to call national security or use terms such as risk management or threat assessment, that is the language that they are using. And to migrants, what we're seeing is exclusion from the system, not being able to see our loved ones, not being able to travel. And so the minute the systems in themselves are inherently biased against women of color, people of color, then it means it becomes violence in a way. I'll give the example of a woman fleeing conflict in Somalia. And she's thinking to herself that I'm no longer going to experience any form of gun. But while crossing into Kenya, what she faces is a camera, one that tries to analyze, and her body becomes a place where her data is taken. So the camera tries to ask, why should we let her in? And so at that particular point, those are acts of slow violence, because what this would do is this woman would probably be traumatized by the experience, but the long number of hours that she spent at the border instead of moving to their family. And so for me, in my vision of peace, I see migration as a digital right. And I say digital right, which needs to be protected, because at this particular stage, the migration, people will keep moving to study, for survival, for love, and you won't move without a digital identity. And therefore, since the two are intertwined, without your digital identity, it would mean you don't have access into the border or the place you're going to. So that's why the two correlate.
Thank you. And we have a question from the audience that I think follows well on what you were just speaking about. What safeguards are in place to prevent machine learning models from absorbing racial biases present in data, specifically in terms of travel?
So the question is very great, because when we talk about machine learning models, you'd ask yourself, what models are we talking about? And so machines train on data. Data could take the form of text, images, or sometimes voice. What is currently being done is having a huge number of data sets, not only from a specific group of people, but trying to incorporate data from the global south as well into the training. However, we've had challenges with this, because in as much as we would have data from people from the global south, there's still a human behind the training. And so if the human is inherently biased, then it would still make the system biased, because the system would pick up on what the human feeds it. So it's still a long process, I would say. We are not yet there, but we're making strides.
Thank you. And Estefania, our next audience question is for you. What tactics and tools can the San Diego Tijuana community employ as border and immigration violence has increased under the current administration in the US?
Well, for the way that I'm going to address this question is from the perspective of transborder commuters, right? And the reality is that the way that this community, like our community, is often portrayed as powerless and voiceless, particularly students, right? I didn't talk about this in the beginning, but a lot of the anxieties that I felt when I was young crossing the border wasn't just about the border, it's about surveillance systems in education institutions. As many of you know, K through 12 schools are often exclude transborder students despite the fact that they're US citizens. Plyler-Bideau was a landmark case that opened education rights to undocumented youth, but that doesn't necessarily apply for US citizens living outside of the school district. And what happens is that students are often silenced. They're afraid of opening up to the school teachers. Imagine a young person having to wake up at 3 a.m., already having to navigate a highly militarized border, all of that before they sit in the classroom. How do you think that's going to affect their education, their life outcomes, their well-being? And so there's so much power in storytelling. I stayed silent for almost a decade, and it wasn't until 2 months before I graduated from San Diego State University that I publicly said I'm transfronteriza. And this is because of the fear of being outed, of the stigma that comes. I had wonderful mentors, some of them that are here today, in San Diego State University, helped me find a voice. So for transborder students, raise your voice. And that means writing op-eds about our stories, because the ways that these borders are characterized are usually with stories of trauma and violence, but not about the agency and resilience of transfronterizo communities. If you don't feel safe opening up, there's an opportunity to create student groups within schools where you can find solidarity with one another. And for professors and teachers to make sure that students feel safe in the classroom, because as we know, schooling systems can often act as appendages of the surveillance state. Sometimes students are afraid of opening up to teachers about the various inequalities that they experience at home. So this is where teachers really have the power to foster that safe space. And that goes to say with higher education institutions as well, to lobby at the national and at the local and at the state level to ensure that there's adequate funding to support binational and transborder students. Policymakers also need to ensure that as part of their border policies, it includes education rights for transborder students.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting the key role that educators can play in creating safe spaces, safe communities, and really making a difference for those students. It aligns perfectly with the question we have. What role can university students who are living on the border play to help these issues? So you spoke about educators, administrators, folks like us at the university, but what about university students?
That's a great question, because there's an opportunity to create student groups. Student groups on campus are important because historically, the university has been a site where marginalized and racialized students have found collective sense of identity and empowerment. We can think of Mecha as an example. This is where transborder students can create these student groups to ensure that student activism and voices can push for more equitable education policies. The way that I found empowerment wasn't through a program like that, because at the time there wasn't something of that way in San Diego State at the time, but I found empowerment in research. I had the wonderful opportunity, and I'll name drop her, Dr. Kristen Maher at San Diego State University, who helped me find the voice of being a transfronteriza. I one time went to her office, opened up about my experiences, and she said, "You need to write about this." I also mentioned Dr. Cheryl O'Brien, who has been a lifelong advocate for me. So by doing research, we can find that sense of empowerment and put a name on our identities and our experiences. And the way that I think about research isn't just research that's going to stay at an academic journal read by few. The potential of research, and the reason why I am an academic, is that I can have the research tools to affect change in my community, to use research as practice, or praxis, I guess they call it. And I take joy in being able to not only be an academic, but to be involved in my community.
Thank you. And I'll take this moment to flag the amazing work that my colleague Rebecca Cazares does here with our Cross-Border Initiatives program as well. So it's a topic that we here at USD are definitely trying to support and do good work in the community. Always lovely to hear that universities can be impactful in this space. Olivia, we've got a question for you. Could you tell us more about your Safe Her app? How can people use it?
Interesting. So in my other life, I run a nonprofit, and it's called Safe Online Women Kenya. So online harms such as deepfakes, where you find images, voice, and text that are generated and then cause harm to people, either through cyberbullying or cyberstalking, was very rampant in Kenya. And I thought to myself, how can I use technology for good? And so Safe Her is a mobile application as well as a web platform where people who experience different forms of online violence find solace in mass reporting. So when you are on different social media platforms, for instance, Instagram, and you face cyberbullying, and you try to report one account, it does not get that attention as should. If 10 people report the same account, then it really raises the eyebrows of the platform. So what the app is supposed to do is be a bridge between survivors of online violence and law enforcement, or people who are supposed to indeed listen, in this case, the platforms. So we have what we call guardians. It's a very good feature because we have human beings behind each type of violence. So for instance, if a woman faces cyberbullying on LinkedIn or even Instagram, one of our volunteers who is assigned cyberbullying as an online crime would assess the threat. Was it high severity, medium, or low? And then try to see if a screenshot was taken, a video attached, to follow through reporting to the platform. Most of the time when people experience online violence, the first thing they do is walk away from the platform. And what that does is it silences your voice. And we are trying to move away from that. So we also have mental health support professionals who speak to survivors of online violence. And because in the digital context, in the Kenyan situation, police officers would never give a listening ear when it comes to cyberbullying because they felt like it is not a physical form of violence. So we are really trying to also have digital literacy trainings just to tell people this is the name you give to this form of violence, because people have also experienced violence online, and because it is normalized in the name of banter or jokes, then they don't realize that they're facing this form of violence. So the app is still in user testing phase because we engage the community to listen to the nuanced forms of violence. In Kenya, we have 42 tribes, and this means violence can occur in different languages. So we are also trying to train our AI to read other languages, which is not very easy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for flagging all of the ways we think about what is real violence and what we're ignoring, and how we can expand our view of how to support survivors. Our next question is for both of you, and Olivia, we'll start with you. In your work, how have you found that border agencies balance discretion with accountability, given that profiling and violence often happens in invisible and unrecorded moments or spaces?
So how I've found that to be is, I would say, people bringing it to my attention, because based off what you would easily go and search online, then realize I think my right was violated or my privacy was violated at this point when they asked me for so much information than required. Then at that point, it's like I lost my agency to the government. And linking this to my work, in this particular case, would say it's the government who is the perpetrator, because by surveilling its citizens, then it has really put some people in precarious positions where, because a system was hacked, this system had mass information on postal codes, physical addresses, names of people, social security numbers, then it really puts them to fraud, or sometimes it gives hackers access to information that they did not necessarily need to have. Yeah.
I'm really glad that this question was asked, because this is one of the primary issues why we have so much cycles of uncontested abuse at the border, because a lot of people don't necessarily know what their rights are. And this is because I think, any border is considered a legal gray area where certain civil rights, some civil rights get waived. And one of the main rights that get waived here at the border and within the 100-mile border zone in the interior of the U.S., which, as you know, encapsulates 3/4 of the U.S. population, is privacy rights and the Fourth Amendment. And before, so the Trump administration in this second presidency tried to get rid of the civil rights organizations and early civil rights accountability offices within the Department of Homeland Security, and now they have been reinstated. So before, what civil rights advocates do is that they refer people that have suffered abuse to file a complaint, whether putting your name or anonymously, through the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties under the Department of Homeland Security, or send it to the Office of the Inspector General. However, organizations have documented, especially, I believe it's Keno Border Initiative in Arizona, and also the ACLU have documented that out of 97, I can't remember the exact number right now, but out of all of the complaints that have been issued against Border Patrol or CBP, OFO, these are the people on the front lines, 97% go unanswered. Either they're not addressed, or there's no follow-up investigation. So this really discourages people to file complaints. And a very important aspect of border policing is because it relies on discretion, right? Officers can make decisions about when to inspect and when not to inspect individuals. And that creates a lot of situations where there's instances of potential racial profiling, of gender violence, of abuse. And this is probably the biggest challenge at the legal level, because there has to be proper mechanisms of these inspection procedures, but because they're given so much discretion, a lot can happen at the border. They're only supposed to ask, for example, to declare your immigration status. But if some of you have crossed the border, they often ask questions that go beyond that. Some of them that have nothing to do with your immigration. And what can you do? You can't contest that, because otherwise they will send you to secondary inspection. That's why I said in another question, there's this culture of absolute obedience to authority. You have to acquiesce. And sometimes that is the only thing that you can do to be able to cross the border. And so this is where I would like to work more with local advocates as a consultant to develop a resource sheet so that people do know who to talk to, what are the legal support systems and the rights that they have. We need to have a Know Your Rights document at the actual port of entry, because there's all these documents inside about you're being watched, there's surveillance cameras over there, but there's no information about what are your rights. Who do you talk to if something happens to you in secondary inspection? So this is where I would love to be working as a consultant with civil rights organizations.
Thank you. We've got time for one more audience question, and our time is running a little bit short, so I'm going to ask you something unfair, which is I'm going to ask you each to answer this in about 1 minute each. I know we could talk forever, but I'm going to ask you to be real quick on this last one. And we'll start with you, Estefania. With today's highly vigilant borders, both physical and digital, How can people balance being outspoken while staying safe?
Wow, the $1,000,000 question. I believe in the power of community. I was part of a fellowship program, Rise San Diego, last year, and a lot of us talked about how we all feel vulnerable during this particular moment to be outspoken. I have the privilege of being a US citizen, so I do feel empowered in that sense, but I'm afraid often, not just about me, but of other family members, of community members, and so I find refuge in my community. And even if I can't be outspoken, we can think about the case of undocumented immigrants that can't be at protests, then at least I can find solace in the fact that I have a community behind me.
Thank you. And Olivia, same question to you.
So I would say not being outspoken can also assist in that you don't have to be at the front line or in the cameras, but you can help to retweet using a pseudo account or an anonymous account that will not identify you if you're afraid to fully disclose who you are.
Thank you. And my last question for us tonight to wrap up our conversation, and we'll start with you, Olivia. What can people in the audience tonight do to support your work and help end violence at our borders?
So first, I'd just like to say you can follow my work on social media, on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Safe Online Women Kenya. At the same time, on a personal level, you can follow me at Lillian Olivia on LinkedIn. I do provide AI literacy trainings to organizations, universities, and community organizers, and so this is an opportunity to work together. You can hire me as a consultant because at this particular time, even when people speak about AI will take our jobs, I often say what will take your job is the person who knows how to use AI best. So AI has its evil, but we can use it for good as well, and I give people that opportunity. Thank you.
And Estefania.
So I offer expert consulting services, which take numerous forms. In one aspect, I conduct workshops on cultural competency on the transborder population, evidence-based research presentations on immigration and border policy. I also conduct public speaking engagements, and I'm a consultant for developing initiatives and policies for transborder commuters. So if you or your organization are interested in any of these programs, please find me in the reception, and I would love to talk more about the different services that I offer. But I also want to highlight the various organizations that are already doing the work on the ground. As I mentioned before, the American Front Service Committee, Alliance San Diego, and Southern Border Communities Coalition. Please donate to those organizations. And finally, provide support for organizations that train local leaders to build coalitions, one being Rise San Diego, and also the Women PeaceMakers program, because this is such a wonderful opportunity that highlights the leadership of women from all over the globe, and it is truly an honor to be part of this program.
And I did not ask her to say that, I promise. I was as surprised as you were. Thank you, that's very kind. Please join me in thanking our amazing fellows for sharing their perspectives with us. You've given us a lot to think about what is violence happening around us that we don't see, invisible or normalized violence, and how can we have a broader view of what violence is and what we should be doing every day to combat it or to be aware of it or to support the people experiencing it. And thank you all for being with us. As the fellows talked about on stage, community is so important, that we're not alone in this work, that together we can make a change. And so I always appreciate folks being with us in this discussion and the change that you all are making in your daily lives as well. If you want to follow the code that's going to go up behind me on the screen, you can learn more about our program. And if you feel like it, support our program. During this time, funding for programs like ours that feature women and women's leadership are dwindling, and so support is always helpful, especially in times like these. I want to thank my Kroc School colleagues for making this event possible, especially Ashley Boren, who's in the trenches with me with this event every year. And finally, I'll flag that we have a dessert reception out those main doors behind you, so you can mix and mingle with these amazing peace builders and talk to them and learn even more than we could share in just 1 hour on the stage together. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight.